In the 1920s, a new trend entered the automotive market, what we call the streamlined movement. Its popularity relies on the influence of technology, such as the overall stamping technology. In the early years, almost every part of the car was built by hand, and then the final splicing was carried out. But the overall stamping technology could make the outline of the car stamped with a set of molds, so the shape of the car could have more curves. The second is the study of aerodynamics. People found that according to the principle of fluid mechanics, the streamlined shape can better reduce the air resistance and make the car have a higher speed. Under this premise, many automobile companies began to carry out technological innovations to introduce streamlines into car styling. Henry Ford fell behind in this respect, so he was gradually abandoned by history. In the decades of history, Ford has lagged behind GM, taking second place. Ford has been in the role of a chaser in the United States. The earliest brand of GM was Chevrolet, which we are very familiar with. The name Chevrolet comes from the racing driver Chevrolet, who was also a famous engineer. The Chevrolet logo is the shape of the bow tie, which comes from the founder of the Chevrolet brand, Durant. During a trip, he saw the shape of the bow tie of a gentleman opposite him. He thought it was very elegant and put it on the car logo design. In 1927, the United States entered the Great Depression, and many companies began to adopt various business methods in order to compete and survive better. Sloan, the chairman of General Motors, injected some new elements into automotive design. Sloan's understanding of cars was different from Henry Ford. He believed that the car is not only a transportation tool, but that it should also have its own personality, like fashion. So he thinks it's incredible that Henry Ford adopted only one shape and one color for 20 years. He believed that people should drive different styles of cars due to their different positions, occupations, and lifestyles. Therefore, he attached great importance to car styling. When he became president of General Motors, he soon set up a color art department. He hired Harry Earl, a designer with an artistic background, as the chief stylist specializing in car styling. In addition, Sloan also made a lot of contributions to car sales. For example, if you go to buy a house or a car today, you will hear a very familiar word called mortgage. The mortgage first appeared in GM, which was also invented by Sloan. This photo shows the Chevrolet sedan developed under the auspices of Earl in 1929. You can find that this car uses a very bright yellow, different from Henry Ford's black, and uses such a curved shape, making it look more rounded and cute. This style was deeply loved by users and quickly occupied the mainstream of the market. When it comes to streamlined cars, one car that must be mentioned is the familiar Beetle. The invention of the Beetle is a special story. The first to give a blueprint of the Beetle is Hitler, the leader of the German Nazis. Hitler had engaged in some fine arts studies before entering politics. But this is not enough to make him a car designer. He always had a dream to get the German people to drive a homegrown car. In 1934, he invited the famous car designer Porsche to drink tea. During this meeting, he told Porsche that driving a car was a source of inexplicable happiness. He said that he hopes more Germans could enjoy this kind of happiness. He even mentioned some details about this car. He thinks that this car should be able to sit 2 adults and 3 children, and the top speed can reach 100 kilometers per hour, and so on. Based on Hitler's ideas, Porsche perfected this car and finally proposed his own design plan. In this picture, we can see that Hitler is listening to Porsche explaining his design plan. According to Hitler's requirements, the price of the first Beetle cannot exceed DM-1000, which was a price that Germans could accept at the time. In order to fulfill the commitment to the people, Hitler even specifically allocated 50 million Deutschmarks to build a new factory, which was named Volkswagen. This is also the foundation for the birth of the Volkswagen brand. But the car that Bolscher had in mind was not the Beetle. After that, Porsche carried out many automotive designs. Later, he also created his own brand, named after his own name. The word Porsche was translated into another name in the car brand, called Porsche. Everyone knows the following story. During World War II, the Volkswagen factory no longer produced the Beetle and instead produced tanks. After World War II, Volkswagen put the Beetle on the production line again and quickly created a new miracle. By 1981, the 20 millionth Beetle car went offline, which marks a miracle in the history of automotive design. It surpassed the 15 million cars of the Ford Model T and set a new world record. In 1998, Volkswagen launched the new Beetle again, which also marks the arrival of a new era. It shows that the streamline movement still has vigorous vitality in the 21st century. So the streamline movement was not just a popular element in the 1930s. Today, we can still see that its cultural flavor and new techniques can reinterpret the original classics. Earlier, we mentioned that General Motors hired Harry Earl for automotive design. Thus, Harry Earl became the first full-time car designer in the world. His style is very bold and very avant-garde because he used to do more commercial design, and he even borrowed some ideas from Hollywood to design cars. He worked for GM for more than 30 years and left many famous vehicle models. Today, he still has a profound influence on American automotive design. Some of his design elements can still be seen in today's automotive design. Harry Earl is a person full of controversy. He is considered to be a representative of American commercial design. In his design, in order to pursue the shape and the appearance, he often ignored some functional aspects. For example, after World War II in the 1950s, he once led General Motors into a new era. At that time, he had become the vice president and chief designer of General Motors. After World War II, he and the young designer Hershey went to visit some air bases at the time. Some fighters in the air bases attracted his attention. Then Hershey and Harry Earl thought about whether they could put some elements of the aircraft into the automotive design. After their elaborate design, they imitated the shape of the vertical tail of the aircraft to design the tail of the car as a tail fin and then install the tail lights on it. The design was applied to the new Cadillac, which was well received after being sold. Why? Because after World War II, people had a very high enthusiasm for the U.S. Air Force. They thought that the Air Force hero was an idol of the time. So the high tail fin car became a very important consumer symbol of the era that was all the rage in America. This picture was taken at the Cadillac Art Exhibition in Beijing. You can see that a Cadillac high tail fin car, combined with the very famous pop art at the time, became one of the most important consumer symbols of the 1950s and 60s. There are many changes in the shape of the high tail fin, but no improvements in functionality. Instead, it produces a louder roar, causing more pollution and fuel consumption. This makes this car controversial, but doesn't stop people from loving it. Even Earl put forward a new principle on this basis, which is called planned abolition. What is planned abolition? It means that Earl wants some changes in car styling every 3 years and big changes every 5 years. He hopes that everyone will have the urge to change the car after 3 to 5 years, to buy a new car and to eliminate the old one. So it can explain why the U.S. used car market is so prosperous. There are often Chinese students in the United States who buy a car for $3,500 in the first year and sell it for $4,000 in the second year. Why? Because the U.S. used car market is a very large market. Many people will buy or change a new car after 3 to 5 years. This is directly related to the policy of Harry Earl. Later, environmentalists believed that it led to a great waste of material and the deterioration of the whole environment. In the 1970s, the era of high-tail fins led GM into a difficult period. Why? Because the oil crisis broke out in the Middle East War, and the price of gasoline skyrocketed. People found that the satisfaction from the roar when driving a car would result in a waste of resources, making driving an economic burden. So people turned to look for cars with small displacement. It marks the end of an era. Since the 1960s and 70s, people have made new changes in the aesthetics of cars. We will talk about that in the next section.